And now let's talk to the man that built my childhood, Jim Swearingen.
It's Kenner's Star Wars action figures, each sold separately.
Oh no! The trash compactor! There's a trash monster!
Ready for takeoff! Jump to light speed!
You can make your own droids or follow the droid maker blueprints.
Activate spring glide wheels! The Force goes with us!
It's Millennium Falcon. You have to put it together.
What's that?
It's my troop transporter! It makes 5 more sounds too!
Boba Fett is not yet available in stores, but you can get him free. Both with flashing lights and sound.
It's Darth Vader! Watch out!
Force is with me! Luke Skywalker wins again!
Star Wars had everything from a great story, mind-blowing special effects, an inspiring soundtrack, but it also had something else that boosted its appeal, and that is a great toy line where kids could further the adventures of their favorite characters.
We are so happy to have Jim Swearingen, the principal concept designer for Kenner's Star Wars toy line, making his podcast debut here with us on Skywalking Through Neverland.
Hey, Mr. Swearingen.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hey, I can't tell you what an honor it is to speak with you. I mean, it's kind of rare to talk with someone that helped build your childhood, and I'm guessing that's something you hear quite often.
Yes, I've been hearing that lately. It makes me feel a little old sometimes when I hear from adults that I made their childhood.
When you were a kid, did you look at your toys and say, you know what, I wish we had this, or we could really use something like this to play with? Because I know when I was a kid, I did that constantly. Did that help build your career into being a toy designer?
Yeah, I think as a kid, I was a very artsy kid. I grew up going, from a very young age, would go to the art museum every Saturday morning to draw and paint and experience the Cleveland Art Museum. Once I got to high school, I ended up at the Art Academy taking lessons there.
When did you start with Kenner, and what toys did you work on before Star Wars?
I started at Kenner in full-time in 1972. I had co-opted for a smaller toy company called Rainbow Crafts while I was in college at University of Cincinnati, called Rainbow Crafts, where Play-Doh had started.
Ooh.
And they were both owned at the time I worked for them by General Mills. And at the time I got hired in 1972, they had already moved and kind of merged the two companies into Kenner and offices in downtown Cincinnati.
So did you work on Play-Doh?
I started with the preschool area, so I did work on Play-Doh. They also were working on Spirograph and just trying to come up with ideas to extend those lines.
You know what? I'm just remembering now that when I was 8 or 9 years old, I had written a letter to Kenner saying, Kenner, could you please make these characters? And I would list all the characters that Kenner didn't get around to making, like Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen and Grand Moff Tarkin, and I think I had like 20 characters I wanted Kenner to make, not knowing that, well, these are the characters that kids aren't going to want to play with. What kid's going to want to play with Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru back in 1978? Do you recall getting any letters when you were working at Kenner from kids?
They did get lots of letters from kids, and they tried pretty hard to at least acknowledge that they had been contacted. So I think a lot of kids were just like you. They were, so into it that they, it's like they pick a favorite character and then why didn't he show up?
Yeah, when I saw the address to Kenner on every one of the Kenner manuals or catalogs, I knew I had to write them and voice my opinion, and to the point where I would even draw out little sketches. Well, actually, I would write out the descriptions of the characters, and my friend Jim Pruitt would do the actual design, the character design with all the color. We even sent you a color palette just to hurry along the process. Now, you know what? Can you name your top 5 Star Wars toys that you were responsible for?
Action figures, X-Wing, TIE Fighter, the Death Star playset, and I'm trying to think, is there a 5th one?
Did you?
I don't know. Maybe the R2-D2 remote control.
fun.
I love that. I brought that into school once. I was like a rock star.
Force is with me. Luke Skywalker wins again.
First figures, I'd originally done drawings for the first 11 characters and then mocked up the first figures. That's where we used the Fisher-Price Adventure people to make the first 11. So using X-Acto knives and body putty, I actually modeled the first figures. The model shop helped with trying to figure out a way to make lightsabers pop out of the hands of the figures. And then I worked on the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter. Those we had used for the prototypes we'd used for presentation with the 20th Century Fox. Between the time we saw the script in February and made the first presentation at 20th Century Fox, it was kind of a game between convincing Kenner Toys, the management at Kenner, that Star Wars was viable and that we should do it. And then the other part of it was convincing 20th Century Fox that a middle-tier Midwestern toy company could produce the product, that we would be capable.
Right.
That's why we put, some rough stuff together, because they'd already been turned down by the biggest toy companies.
Mm-hmm.
We had the $6 Million Man that we introduced in 76.
Kenner's new $6 Million Man with bionic grip. Mission to Mars adventure set sold separately.
So we had something to show, and we had a lot of stuff, Play-Doh and Spirograph, but $6 Million Man was probably the first licensed product that we did. So that was our only, that's the only thing we could say, hey, we did $6 Million Man, and it's a big success for Christmas of 76. So we had to convince them. But between that, it was, the preliminary design department, me, I guess, we were the biggest champions of the Star Wars up until May, until everybody was suddenly everybody's like, oh, of course we should be doing that.
Now, when you were saying that you had helped design with the first 11 figures, since you were so close to Star Wars, did you have a hand in selecting the first wave? And then the first wave had 12 figures originally. So what was that one last figure that was added to make up that last wave?
The Death Star Commander. He's the one that I did not model. Between Kenner and Star Wars, the way it worked, I picked the most obvious ones because they were the lead characters in the storyline.
They were toyetic.
Yeah, and they were, I think they felt after it was all turned over to production design, they needed at least one more bad guy. So that's where the Death Star Commander came from.
I see.
Oh, that answers a lot of questions.
Now I know the Force is with us.
Did you consider adding any of the Cantina creatures into that first wave? Because we didn't see them until a year later, and that was the one scene that really stuck out to everyone.
Until May 2nd, nobody knew who the Cantina was. I mean, there were characters' names, Greedo, but we hadn't seen them, so there wasn't any way to do them. The first characters were all based on black and white photographs that we got when we got the script.
Okay.
The Cantina and that whole storyline hadn't been seen. And I think to get then from, once the movie broke, we did everything we could do to get product on the shelf by the 1st of 1978.
So the figures were already chosen before you saw the film in the beginning of May. Yeah. We'd already because as I say, the black and white photo book that we got had most of those characters were in there because it was all from the live action, and and part of it was, I think Lucas wanted to keep some stuff secret. He probably had photographs, but he didn't want all the details going out all at once. So we were as in the dark as anyone else. So until the movie broke, and then it's like, oh, that's what that scene's all about, And Greedo's wasn't described in the script. It's just Greedo's this character that Han Solo's dealing with, and then shoots him. But we hadn't really seen the character. There wasn't any description of him.
And here's Greedo, Han Solo, and Walrus Man.
You've had it now, Solo. Yeah. Guido, it's Ben Kenobi and his lightsaber. We're in trouble. Let's get out of here.
The whole cantina scene, if you just read it in the script, you have no idea who those people are, who the characters are.
Right.
By May of 77, once the action figures were turned over, my involvement in action figures really dropped off because we had more to worry about. I worked on the Death Star playset and the remote control stuff, and we let production design and engineering take over. And then all those decisions, then they assigned a product manager who could work with those people and pick out characters. Because once the initial wave of figures was in the pipeline, they didn't need any more preliminary design development. That was all just okay. We're going to do Greedo, and we'll do Walrus Face and those things. So it's just then it becomes just a matter of picking a thing and turning it around right in production design.
Okay.
Right.
Here's the new Star Wars Death Star space station that you put together. Action figures each sold separately.
Darth Vader's firing a laser cannon. It's been hit. He's after Luke. Take the elevator. Hurry! Now cross the light bridge.
You won't escape me.
Jump, Luke. Oh no, the trash compactor. There's a trash monster. The wall's closing. Save!
Kenner's new Star Wars Death Star space station. Action figures each sold separately.
Did you design what we now know as that Death Star playset?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh.
I mean, it changed over once it was in production, but it was cobbled together in preliminary.
Do you recall what your basis was, what you wanted to start off with, and what kind of shape it was going to take?
We were working partially against price points, and we knew we couldn't do a complete Death Star, so doing a pie-shaped piece of it, kind of predetermined by the price point. The two big, there were a couple of scenes that we were trying to kind of squeeze into it. The big gun that blew up in one of the scenes, the trash compactor was, of course, the key part of that. And then the trap doors and stuff, the prison cell. So we picked pieces of what we thought would be interesting, and then developing the pie shape and the elevator and stuff.
Does the preliminary sketches that you had come up with still exist? Do you still have those? I'd love to see the evolution of this toy.
I wish I did too.
Oh.
The only thing I have is a picture of the turnover model that we used. All the drawings and stuff that I originally did, as far as I know, are long gone. I have my collector feelers out trying to find out if somebody actually has original stuff, just in case I'd like to get copies of them. Right now I have some photographs that I've gleaned from, that I actually had in my files, but a lot of that stuff, because it's on paper, all disappeared. The models and things, because people ask about models, the first figure models in the X-Wing and TIE Fighter. I do know that one of those models exists, but a lot of it was turned over. We had an area it was on the 12th floor of the Kroger building that was a room, and then it had a chain link cage in it. All the old preliminary models and turnover things ended up in the morgue under lock and key. And then when they moved the company to its next location, the morgue was opened. Some of that stuff's escaped. I could have, if I'd had more larceny in my soul, I could have probably walked away with some of those things, but I was, I guess, way too honest. I'd left it all there.